Welcome to the Living Unoffended podcast with your host, Brant Hansen.
Boy, I hope this podcast is a big help to you. I really do. That's why I'm doing it. I've been wanting to do it for a while. It's just that sometimes in your own head, you got this big grand idea of how it's going to turn out. And that can actually stop you from doing something because I started doing it and it didn't sound so big and grand at all. So I had to remind myself, look, better to do something that's like not optimal, but at least to get it done. That's how I initially wrote my first book, which this is largely based on, this podcast series, Unoffendable. Like, I can't just let the perfect be the enemy of actually getting something done. So this isn't going to be perfect, but I hope it's an encouragement to you. We have to talk about this stuff. This is the drive to do this just because I don't feel like it gets talked about enough at all. I was on Focus on the Family recently, talking about loving our enemies. This was after the Charlie Kirk assassination. They just wanted some perspective. So they had me and a guy named Gabe Lyons on, and we talked about the need to love our enemies. And I had mentioned that churches don't often talk about this topic. And Jim Daly, to his great honest credit, the host of the show, said, you know what? I'm 60-some years old, and I don't think I've ever heard a sermon about how to love our enemies. And that says a lot. Again, I appreciated him saying that. I don't know that I've heard one either. Is that kind of weird? I think it's very weird because this is so central to what it means to be a Jesus follower. It's not a side issue. It's over and over and over. The forgiveness thing, the focus on loving our enemies, it's not subtle. So I'm always kind of mystified by that. So I thought this would help. And I recently heard on a completely different show, Julian Edelman, who played wide receiver, maybe you remember him for the Patriots, won several Super Bowls. And the host of the show had asked him, how come you guys didn't fumble? You just didn't fumble. Like the Patriots just weren't a fumbling team. Like other teams would turn it over. You guys just didn't. And that was just part of the DNA of the team. Why was that? And what Edelman said was so interesting to me. He said, well, we talked about it all the time. And when you talk about something all the time, it becomes part of your DNA. It becomes part of your subconscious. You're always thinking about it. And he said, I fumbled 3 times, and I remember vividly each time because it was such a big deal to fumble. Like, we just don't do that. It was like you're carrying the entire team when you're carrying the football. You're carrying the entire program. You're carrying the organization, the people who work in the front office, the people who work in the marketing department, the fans in New Hampshire, he said. They're all riding with you. See, we made a big deal out of it. And when you make a big deal out of something, it manifests itself in your behavior. That's what I'm hoping to do with this podcast, and I hope it's helpful to you. Even as I'm learning how to do this, how to love my enemies, I hope this is a big encouragement. So I think each episode will wind up being 10, 15 minutes. I don't know, but around there. And it's just a reminder about how to actually live out this thing that I wrote about in Unoffendable. If you haven't read the book, that's okay, but it might behoove you to listen to the audio book if you're interested. I wish you can usually get it from a library. I'm not honestly not trying to sell something. You can usually get it from a library, the audio book too. But I think that'll help you a lot because it's very counterintuitive about what life following Jesus actually looks like. For those of us who are taught about our righteous anger and how we're supposed to have righteous anger towards this and that and the other thing, like, how do we actually live that out? And again, I think the teaching of the Bible is very consistent on this about humans not having righteous anger and certainly not being able to determine for ourselves when our anger is actually righteous or not, because we'll always think it is. But if you listen to that, I actually lay out scripturally where I'm coming from if you want that background. And if you've already read it, you don't have to, obviously. Either way, but I think it'll really help. And I think talking about this, like keeping it in front of us, can be a reminder. Maybe you can listen to this on your way into work or listen to it while you're in traffic or whatever and be reminded about what it's actually like to follow in the way of Jesus in this way. There's this story. I was just looking at this. I mentioned it briefly in Unoffendable, but it's such an important story. And it's the story that Jesus tells about the unmerciful servant. And I did some math on this the other day, because I'd never done this math, but let me read you from Matthew 18, right? So this is the story. It says, then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Because he'd heard Jesus say 7 times before. And Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. And then he launches into the story. So it's immediately in the context of Peter asking him about forgiveness. How many times am I supposed to forgive? Like, where's the limit? There's got to be a limit here. And Jesus is effectively saying, there is no limit. But check out the story, because the story seems to suggest that there is a limit. Anyhow, the story says, therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. 10,000 bags of gold. Wow. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when the servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me, and I will pay it back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. So there's one irony that happens. Like I've had people use this story to tell me, see, we should be angry about things. See, the master got angry at the end, and his anger, like, yeah, okay, we're not the master in this story. We're the servant in the middle there. But I did the math. Like, what's 10,000 bags of gold? It actually says 10,000 talents in the original Greek. And so I was like, okay, what's a talent? Exactly. Well, it turns out a talent is 6,000 denarii. I'm like, okay, so what's a denarii? And a denarii is worth $50. So if you do the math, then one talent is 6,000 denarii. 6,000 denarii times 50 is $300,000 in today's money, approximately. We're just doing approximate here. But $300,000 for a talent. And how many talents did he have? He had 10,000 talents, each worth about $300,000. So he owes the guy, he has a personal debt to the master of $3 billion. That's pretty amazing. $3 billion. And what the dude owed him was not much at all. So the second guy. But if you're like, well, that's totally unrealistic. How could you possibly owe someone $3 billion? Well, this is Jesus' story. He can do what he wants. He's just making a point about, like, imagine owing somebody that much. You can never, ever pay it back. He's done. Why does the master forgive him? Just because he asked, which is pretty amazing. But he turns around and won't forgive the other guy. So at first, it seems like Jesus is making the point that there is no limit. It's 3 billion, you know. But then he turns around and he does have a limit. The wild thing about this story is the limit was the limit that the servant put on the other servant. I think we're walking away from this going, wow, the limit for us is whatever limit we have for other people. Right? I mean, that jibes with other parts of Scripture for sure. As we forgive, we're forgiven. Whatever measure we use comes back to us. Like, there is a limit, and the limit is whatever limit we use on others. So that's just something to think about today. And for me too, like, what kind of limit do I want? Because as I'm wielding limits on other people with my impatience or my lack of blessing on other people, maybe it's in traffic, or maybe it's people from work, or maybe it's how much I can hate people in the news, people I don't like, or whatever. how much do I extend to them? How much grace do I extend to them? That's setting the measure that I want God to use for me. So I don't think there's anything really revolutionary in this that I'm saying maybe, but I think it helps. It helped me to think about it that way, and hopefully you. So today, think about that and be just wildly like profligate with your grace for other people, your patience for other people. Let's do this thing.
You've been listening to the Living Unoffended podcast with Brant Hansen. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share. And if you'd like more information on Brant Hansen, his book Unoffendable, and more, go to branthansen.com.